And next, I would like to go ahead and introduce Dr. Ben Faber. He is a UC Cooperative Extension Farm Advisor stationed with Ventura and Santa Barbara counties, but he is helpful to just all over the place. So thank you for being here, and I'll leave it up to you now.
Wow. So it's a beautiful day to talk about mulch and other things. I'm listed as speaking on mulch and cover cropping, and both those topics could probably cover several days worth of discussion. So I'm just going to focus on mulching and our experiences in avocados and citrus, and the benefits and the drawbacks of using mulch in avocados and citrus. So mulch is not new. It's been studied for a long time. This is a work that was done at UC Riverside back before it was a UC. This is some work that was done on navel oranges. And they were looking at the effects of using various materials such as alfalfa, bean straw, manure, and we're using the standard measure, which is yield. And you can see the high variation in response of the trees using pine shavings versus alfalfa. And now we know pine shavings don't have any nitrogen or very little, and alfalfa is just chock-a-block with alfalfa. So in fact, mulching with the alfalfa, they were effectively adding nitrogen to the navel orange crop. And so, you know, there are these varieties of variations that you'll see with using different mulches. What we were looking at in the case of avocados and citrus was specifically disease suppression. And the background photo is of fire fang fungus that's growing on mulch, and this is a pretty common occurrence. You know, you put organic matter out into the environment and it starts to decompose almost immediately. And it's, you know, the woodier the material, the more fungus and bacteria jump on it and start chewing it up. And so that's one reason why you're getting these nutrient effects, is organic matter breaks down and it releases its mineral nutrients. But you have water savings, nutrient effects, weed suppression, you have impacts on insects and other arthropods, and boom, snails too. So one common misconception is that mulch is not compost. Mulch is actually a practice, it's a verb. You can compost, you can verb organic material, you can compost organic material, but mulch is a surface applied material. And mulch can be a compost. You can apply compost to the surface, but more commonly compost is incorporated into the soil. So mulch is specifically a surface application of material, and anything can be applied to the surface, you know, rocks or newspaper. So it doesn't have to be an organic material. It can be a mixed or a single source. So one of the most common sources of mulch is from the backyards and collected by cities. And later on, we'll hear about how the city of San Diego is collecting urban yard waste. We call it green gold to be used as mulch. We found that over the years that there really is no one material that is bad specifically to be used as a mulch. There are some materials that are, you know, woody and clean and free of weed seeds and so on that are better, but just about anything can be a very good material used as a mulch. So yard waste mulches basically have organic matter. They have impacts on the physics of soil, the chemistry of soil, and the microbiology. And so, you know, you're not just doing one thing when you're putting mulch down. You're changing the temperature of the soil because it insulates it. So in the summertime, that can be good. You know, we just heard about how climate change is happening, and you know, mulch can cool an orchard in the summertime, but by golly, it can also make it colder in the wintertime. So mulched orchards are generally insulated against temperature change and typically towards a cooler temperature. Chemistry is going to change because as it breaks down, it releases everything that is contained in the organic matter. All organic matter is going to contain the materials that it was made from. And plant materials are taking up these mineral nutrients from the soil and combining it with carbon dioxide from the air and nitrogen often from the air if it's a legume, and combining it into a plant. And when that breaks down, and you release those nutrients. And then it has, as a source of energy, carbon, it is going to have an impact on the range and the intensity of microbes in the soil, microbiome. So some of these impacts of mulch are rapid. And one of the things that we saw, this is a lemon tree in a lemon orchard, and what you see here is a copper band, which are used to keep snails out. And one of the first trials we did was in a lemon orchard where we put out 0, 1 inch, 3 inches, and 6 inches of mulch. And almost within the first week, we saw that the orchards that had no mulch in them had these snails that were built up around the bands. And in the areas that we applied mulch, we saw virtually no snails. You know, and you're changing the whole environment here. So it becomes a changed environment for ants as well. So mulches discourage Argentine ants and in favor of California fire ants. So, it also improves the environment for meadow mice. So when we first put out mulch, we actually saw a lot more damage to lemon trees that had mulch because the meadow mice were hiding in there, and they'd scurry out and they'd start chewing on the bark of and on the cambium of the lemon trees. Another thing that you see pretty soon is you know, suppressing weed growth, and that basically is not permitting light to shine on the soil to allow weed seeds to blow in and seeds that are in the ground to start germinating. Mulch that's brought in from, you know, unknown sources can also be bringing in weed seed as well. So a lot of people that have mulched orchards have inadvertently brought in Bermuda grass. So, you know, it can be dicey when it comes to the impact of what is imported, but one of the most notable impacts is the suppression of weeds. And oftentimes, you know, if the mulch is properly prepared before being spread, there's very little chance of spreading weeds. We prefer woody materials for mulches, and that's just because the mulch is out there to be persistent. It's trying to replicate a naturally occurring mulch that occurs. And when you put the mulch down, the roots architecture adapts to that mulch. And a lot of times in the case of things like avocados, they actually integrate their roots into the mulch. So you want the mulch to be persistent so that the adaptation that the roots make to the presence of the mulch is persistent. You don't want to have these roots exposed to the sun suddenly and the drying effects. So mulches that take in palm and pine and eucalyptus are very common in this Southern California landscapes. And oftentimes you'll find that palm, pine, and eucalyptus seedlings come up in these materials. They're easily pulled out though. So one of the other most immediate effects from using mulch is, you know, basically you're reducing evaporative loss. And we've actually measured at least 25% reduction in water use when mulches are used. You know, even just this is about a a 2-inch layer of mulch, and even that can have a significant impact on evaporative loss. We measured this in an avocado orchard where we had tensiometers inside and outside of mulched areas where avocados were, and this higher reading is an indication that the unmulched trees had drier soil than those that were in the mulched trees. So it's, you know, this can be a benefit typically in a water sparse environment like Southern California. When we do get rain, because it suppresses evaporative loss, it can actually keep soils wetter. And this became quite apparent that when you're mulching an orchard and some trees are mulched and some are not, you got to figure out how to irrigate those things, because the unmulched trees are going to dry out sooner than the mulched trees. So after damaging a lot of trees, we found out that you really have to mulch a whole irrigation block at one time so that you can know exactly what is required. It's very difficult to irrigate a partially mulched or an unmulched orchard. We are dealing with organic matter with mulches, and mulches deteriorate over time. We call it decomposing. And as they decompose, they release carbon dioxide because the microbes are chewing on it and getting energy from that carbon, releasing it as CO2. And they release their the mineral nutrients that are there. So one of the things to remember is this is, over time, you really want to put down a thickness that is going to be persistent. And in the case of avocados, you really want to get in there one time to put material down, put it down 4 to 6 inches deep. And then over time, gradually the avocados will generate their own mulch. And this is partially true in lemons as well. You know, you put it down, and with time you do pruning, and you can blow those prunings into the row where the trees are, and gradually build up mulch over time. So this is the good stuff that we're looking at for disease suppression. It's this fungus that's growing on the mulch, and the very action of breaking down this lignin and the cellulose is done by enzymes. The fungi don't have mouths, but they excrete enzymes that break this material down, liquefy it so that they can suck up the nutrients. And in doing so, if you have Phytophthora in the environment, Phytophthora has a cell wall that's made out of cellulose, and so all this free enzyme around there is going to break down Phytophthora. So it's a very effective material for controlling Phytophthora in both avocados and citrus. And this is what we looked at. Looking at the effect of mulches on persistence of Phytophthora cinnamomi, the root rot disease organism that takes out avocados. And we looked at the presence of how persistent these were over time. And when we got into the soil where the mulch was, you can see that there was very little disease organisms that were there, whereas when you got deeper in the soil where the impact of the mulch was less, the Phytophthora persisted longer. But even having a mulch present, we had lower amounts of Phytophthora. You can see by the green bars here. So this is what you see. This is a nice this is a nice white healthy root, and you know, the avocado roots get into that mulch and they really love it. They really want to grow outside of the soil. They love that organic environment. And so we were looking at the effect of mulch on nutrients, and looking at water and weed suppression and snails and ants. These are almost automatic. You know, you see these effects from the mulch occurring within, you know, weeks after application. The breakdown and release of nutrients takes a longer period of time. So what we looked at was the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium in the soil under mulched soils and unmulched soils, and you can see a lot of more nitrogen appearing in the mulched soil, and you can see more phosphorus and more potassium. So that happens over a period of 4 years, 3 to 4 years in the soil, but that may be delayed happening in the plant. So you can see there's a slight difference in nitrogen between the mulched and the unmulched here in the soil, but in the plant, the leaf analysis might take longer. So, you know, organics take time, and you've got to wait for this material to break down in order to release their nutrients. So if you're expecting to see an instantaneous nutrient impact, you're not going to see it with mulch. One of the more impressive impacts was we were looking at mulch effects on erosion, and you know, this is an area in Ventura County where they had avocados, and they died of root rot, and so they'd planted the hillsides to lemons, and it just followed standard lemon practices, and pretty soon there was no topsoil left. It all washed away. So we looked at putting out either a mulch, yard waste mulch compared to barley or fescue, and compare that to a bare soil, and there was a mulch. This is the amount of sediment that we collect at the base of the hills with and without either a cover crop or a mulch or nothing. And I mean, just having something on the soil can have a significant impact on erosion. The soil wants to be covered. So what are the problems with mulch? Well, because you are releasing nutrients, organic matter is breaking down, you're releasing nitrogen, it kind of, over time, it really perks a tree up, and it's being released. California soils are warm. You have microbial activity going on most of the time. It's not like a cold Illinois soil that just slows down when it gets cold and frozen. Well, in most coastal agriculture in San Diego, we don't get frozen soils, so organic matter is being broken down and nutrients are being released. So that can actually delay some hardiness going into the wintertime. If you keep a tree actively growing going into December, January, they can actually get more frost damage. There are problems with excess moisture. We've had years where we've had 30, 40 inches, 50 inches of rain, and if you've got a mulch cover crop, if you have mulch covering the soil, it's not going to dry out as fast, and so it can keep the soil wet and actually lead to more tree disease. If you're not watching your gophers or mice or rabbits for that matter, you can actually see much more rodent damage. It's hard to see them when they're hiding under the mulch. You can introduce weeds, and diseases are a possibility. The way commercial mulch is used and applied, you have to have a certain volume and quantity to justify going and spreading. You need to have an entire irrigation block covered at the same time so that you can meet the water needs of the mulched or unmulched areas. It's an efficient management approach. You cannot irrigate mulched and unmulched areas in the same way. And so typically you'll accumulate, at 6-inch mulch on a 6-foot bed is going to take about 400 cubic yards of material. So if you're going to be mulching a 10-acre irrigation block, you're going to need 4,000 cubic yards of material. And so it takes a while to accumulate. I mean, it takes a while to get enough truckloads in there. And while it's sitting out there, it's breaking down, it's heating up, it's getting hot, it's getting hot, it's getting 180 degrees, 18 inches into the pile, and that kills weeds and diseases. So
Ben, 2 minutes, yeah. Ben.
Okay, thank you.
2 minutes.
And applying material is expensive. Mulch is an expensive material. And this is what happens with mice damage. It costs labor. It can be a mess putting it out. And so we have basic rules of mulching. Mulch a whole irrigation block one time. Keep mulch 6 inches away from the trunk to make sure that it doesn't accumulate around the trunk and keep it wet and leads to trunk cankers. Let the pile sit for 2 weeks, and that will take care of most weeds and diseases. Keep the stockpiles close so it's easy to spread. Inspect loads for trash. There's garbage. You got to watch out and got to send loads away that are a mess. So mulching and cover cropping, it can look good and trees love it. So glad to answer any questions if there are any.